A cop pulled over a lone Hells Angel. Then he noticed the ring and immediately changed his tone. Rain fell steady on the windshield, drumming a soft beat that Dana Reyes had come to know well over 15 years of night shifts. She sat in her patrol car on the shoulder of Route 9, parked under the shadow of a big oak tree, watching the water run in little rivers down the glass. The coffee in her cup holder had gone lukewarm an hour ago. She drank it anyway. Some habits didn't need to make sense. They just needed to be there, steady as an old friend. She glanced at the visor above her head, where a small photo was clipped with a black binder clamp. The photo had gone soft at the edges from years of sun and handling. In it, Tom smiled the way he always smiled, like he knew something good was about to happen. He had his arm slung over an old Triumph motorcycle, the one that now sat half-broken in her garage, gathering dust and grease and memories she didn't know what to do with. 8 years. It felt like both a lifetime and no time at all. Donna rubbed her eyes and looked out at the empty road stretching in both directions. Route 9 was quiet tonight, quieter than usual even for a Tuesday. The rain kept most sensible people inside. She thought about the years right after Tom passed, how the silence in the house used to feel like a physical weight pressing on her chest. She'd taken more shifts back then, more overtime, anything to avoid going home to a house that echoed with his absence. Ryan had worried about her, but he'd been dealing with his own grief too, and neither of them had known how to help the other. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Things were better now. Not fixed. Just better. She had her routines. She had her job, which still meant something to her even after all these years. She had Ryan, who called every Sunday like clockwork, checking in, making sure she was eating right, sleeping enough. She had the memory of Tom, folded neatly into the corners of her life where it didn't hurt so much to look at it directly. But some nights, like this one, the loneliness crept back in. It came quiet, like the rain. It didn't announce itself. It just settled over her, heavy and familiar. She thought about the garage at home, about that Triumph sitting there under an old tarp, the engine parts scattered on a workbench where Tom had left them the week before the accident. She hadn't touched it since, couldn't bring herself to. Fixing it felt like saying goodbye all over again, and selling it felt like erasing him. So it just sat there, unfinished, the way so much of her grief felt unfinished. She sighed and reached for her coffee again, taking another sip of the cold, bitter liquid. Outside, the rain had picked up, drumming harder now against the roof of the car. She turned up the radio a notch, letting the low hum of dispatch chatter fill the silence. That was when she saw it. Headlights, far down the road, moving fast. Too fast for these conditions. Dana sat up straighter, her cop instincts kicking in immediately, pushing the grief back down into its familiar corner. She watched the light grow closer, and as it did, she made out the shape of a motorcycle, its rider hunched low against the rain, engine roaring even over the sound of the storm. She checked her radar. 72 miles an hour, in a 55 zone. In the rain. Idiot, she muttered, setting down her coffee and reaching for the switch on her dash. Her lights flared to life, red and blue slicing through the wet darkness, reflecting off the slick pavement in long streaks of color. She pulled out onto the road, tires hissing against the wet asphalt, and fell into pursuit. She picked up her radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 14. I've got a motorcycle heading eastbound on Route 9, speeds in excess of 70 in a 55. Initiating a traffic stop. The dispatcher's voice crackled back an acknowledgement. Dana kept her eyes locked on the taillight ahead, her hands steady on the wheel despite the slick road. Whoever this was, they were about to learn that speeding through her town on a night like this wasn't going to slide. The motorcycle pulled onto the shoulder up ahead, its taillight glowing red through the sheets of rain. Dana parked behind it, leaving a safe distance, the way her training had drilled into her 1,000 times. She sat for a moment, watching the rider through her rain-streaked windshield. He didn't move right away. He just sat there on his bike, both hands visible on the handlebars, waiting. That was good. That was smart. Some people got twitchy during a stop, reaching for things they shouldn't, making sudden moves that put everyone on edge. This guy just waited, patient as a stone, letting the rain fall around him. Dana radioed in the stop, giving her location and a description of the bike. Then she grabbed her flashlight, checked that her rain jacket was zipped, and stepped out into the storm. The rain hit her immediately, cold and sharp, running down the back of her neck despite her collar. She approached the motorcycle slowly, flashlight raised, her other hand resting near her belt out of habit more than fear. As she got closer, she could make out more details about the rider. He was big. Broad shoulders, thick arms, the kind of build that came from years of hard work rather than a gym. He wore a leather cut, soaked dark from the rain, and even in the dim light of her flashlight, she could see the patches sewn across the back and front. Hell's Angels. The words alone made her stomach tighten, old instincts kicking in from years of hearing stories, some true, some exaggerated, all of them enough to put a person on guard. His beard was gray, trimmed close but full, and rain dripped steadily from the end of it like a leaky faucet. He reached up with both hands, slow and deliberate, and pulled off his helmet, setting it on the seat in front of him. His hair was gray too, cropped short, and his face was lined in the way faces got after 45 years of sun and wind and hard living. But his eyes, when they met hers, were calm, steady, nothing like the hard, challenging stares she sometimes got from people who didn't want to be pulled over. "Evening, officer," he said. His voice was low and rough, but there was no edge to it, no attitude. "License and registration," Dana said, keeping her flashlight angled so she could see his hands, his face, everything at once. "Old habits." "Sure thing." He moved slowly, reaching into the inside pocket of his cut, careful and unhurried, like he'd done this 100 times before, and knew exactly how to keep an officer from getting nervous. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, thumbed it open, and slid out his license. Then he reached into a saddlebag on the side of the bike and produced his registration, holding both out to her without a word of complaint. Dana took them, glancing down at the name. Marcus Kane. 45 years old. She looked back up at him. "You know how fast you were going back there?" "Faster than I should have been," Marcus said. Rain came out of nowhere. "I was trying to get off the road before it got worse." He didn't argue, didn't make excuses beyond that simple explanation, didn't puff up or get defensive the way she half expected from a man wearing those patches. He just sat there, rain running down his face, hands still visible, waiting for whatever came next. Donna studied him for a moment. She'd pulled over plenty of bikers in her time, plenty of tough-looking men who wanted to argue about every ticket, who saw a uniform and got their backs up before she'd even said a word. This was different. This man was calm. Respectful, even. It threw her off balance in a way she didn't quite expect. "Stay right there," she said, taking a step back. "I'll be back in a minute." She turned her flashlight back toward his license, meaning to head to her car and run the information, when the beam caught something on his hand. A ring. Silver, braided, with a small shape engraved on it that made her breath catch in her throat. Dana's flashlight stayed frozen on Marcus's hand. The ring caught the light in a way that made everything else disappear. Braided silver, twisted like rope, with a small anchor carved right into the metal. Rain ran over it in little rivers, but the shape didn't blur. She knew that shape. She would know it anywhere. For a moment, the rain, the cars passing on the wet highway, the cold soaking through her jacket, none of it existed. All she could see was Tom's hand. Tom, sitting across from her at the kitchen table 30 years ago, turning his coffee mug in slow circles while he talked about his day. Tom's hand resting on the steering wheel of their old truck, tapping out the beat of some song on the radio. Tom's hand, still and pale in the hospital bed, the ring loose on his thinning finger during those last terrible weeks. That ring didn't exist anywhere else. She had asked the jeweler herself, years ago, back when she still had the strength to ask questions about Tom's things. The old man in Cedar Falls had told her, plain and simple, that he made it special. One of a kind. He said he'd never make another like it, not for anybody, and then not long after that, he'd closed up his shop for good and moved away. Tom's ring was supposed to be the only one in the whole world. But here it was, on a stranger's hand, in the rain, on the side of Route 9. "Officer?" Marcus's voice pulled her back. She realized she'd been standing there for who knew how long, flashlight locked on his hand, rain dripping off the brim of her hat and onto her nose. Her heart was slamming against her ribs so hard she wondered if he could hear it over the storm. "That ring," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Where did you get that ring?" Marcus glanced down at his own hand like he'd forgotten it was there. He turned it slightly, letting the light catch the anchor again, and something soft passed over his face. Not confusion, not suspicion, just quiet recognition, like he'd been asked about it before and always felt the same way when he was. "It was my father's," he said. "He passed it down to me a few years back, before things got bad for him." He paused, studying her face now, maybe noticing the way her hands weren't quite steady, the way she was still staring at his fingers like they held some kind of answer. "Why do you ask?" Dana didn't answer right away. She couldn't. Her mouth had gone dry despite the rain pouring down around them, and her mind was racing through 30 years of memories, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense at all. "Your father," she finally managed. Did he make things? With his hands? Was he a mechanic? Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Surprise, maybe, or caution, the kind that came from a lifetime of people making assumptions about him and his family. But he answered anyway, slow and careful. "Yeah, he ran a repair shop for years. Fixed up motorcycles mostly, some cars too. Best hands I ever saw on an engine." He tilted his head slightly, watching her. "Little town called Cedar Falls. You know it?" The name hit Dana like a fist to the chest. Cedar Falls. Tom's hometown. The place he grew up, The place he learned to ride. The place he never stopped talking about even after they'd moved 3 states away and built a whole life somewhere else. The place where a jeweler had once made a ring nobody else in the world was supposed to have. Dana stood there in the pouring rain, flashlight trembling in her hand, staring at a stranger on the side of the highway who was wearing a piece of her husband's past on his finger. The rain kept falling, cold and steady, soaking through her jacket, running down Marcus's beard, drumming against the metal of his motorcycle. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. The only sound was the storm around them and the roar of blood in Dana's ears. She opened her mouth, closed it again. She didn't know where to even begin. "Get in the car," Dana said. "Please, just for a minute. Out of this rain." Marcus blinked at her, rain sliding off his eyebrows. "Am I being detained, officer?" "No." She shook her head, and some of the water from her hat splashed onto her shoulder. "No, nothing like that. I need to ask you some things. Please." Something in her voice must have told him this wasn't a trick. He nodded slowly, swung his leg off the bike, and followed her to the cruiser parked behind him, its lights still washing red and blue across the wet asphalt. Dana opened the passenger door for him, which she never did, and he climbed in, folding his large frame into the seat like a man used to being too big for the spaces he occupied. Dana walked around to the driver's side and got in, pulling the door shut against the storm. The sudden quiet felt strange after the roar of the rain outside. She sat there for a second, hands on the wheel even though the car wasn't moving, trying to steady her breathing. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "This isn't normal procedure. I know that. It's all right." Marcus's voice was calm, even gentle. He'd clearly been on the wrong side of enough traffic stops in his life to know how to wait. "You want to tell me what's going on?" Dana turned in her seat to look at him properly. Really look at him, without the flashlight and the rain in the way. Up close, he had kind eyes, she noticed. Tired, but kind. Not what she expected from a man wearing a Hells Angels patch on his back. "That ring," she said again. "Tell me more about your father." "Please." Marcus turned his hand over in his lap, looking down at the ring like he was seeing it fresh. His name was Walter. Everybody called him Wrench, on account of, well, you can probably guess. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth, there and gone. He wasn't a big talker, my dad. Kept to himself mostly, but when he did talk, it was usually about the shop. "The shop in Cedar Falls," Dana said. "That's right. Kane's Repair. Little cinderblock building off the main road, right by the diner. He ran that place for almost 20 years, back in the 70s and into the 80s. Fixed up half the bikes in that town, probably." Marcus glanced over at her. "You know it? Cedar Falls isn't exactly on the map for most people." "My husband grew up there," Dana said. Her voice cracked a little on the word husband. She cleared her throat and pushed on. Tom Reyes." Marcus went still, really still, the kind of stillness that made Dana's pulse jump. "Tommy," he said quietly, like he was tasting the name, testing it against something buried deep in his memory. "My dad used to talk about a Tommy, guy who used to hang around the shop all the time when he was younger. Dad used to tell this same story over and over every time we worked on a bike together. Said there was this kid, Tommy, who didn't have 2 dimes to rub together, but he had more heart for engines than anybody Dad ever met." Dana's hands had started to shake again. She gripped the steering wheel tighter to hide it. "He taught him," Marcus went on, staring straight ahead now, lost in the memory. taught him everything he knew. Said the two of them spent a whole summer, maybe longer, working on this beat-up old Triumph. Said it was in rough shape when they started. Engine seized up, rust everywhere, one of the wheels bent nearly in half. He shook his head, almost laughing at the memory even though it wasn't his own. Dad said by the time they were done, that bike ran better than anything else in the shop. Said Tommy rode it out of there like he was king of the whole town. Dana's vision blurred. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, trying to hold herself together, but it was no use. The tears came anyway, mixing with the rain still clinging to her face. Because right now, at this very moment, sitting in her garage at home, was that same Triumph. Rusted, broken, silent for 8 long years, ever since Tom had passed, and she hadn't been able to bring herself to touch it, sell it, or even look at it for too long. Marcus watched her, his brow furrowing with a concern that seemed too gentle for a man his size. "Ma'am, you all right?" Dana couldn't answer right away. She sat there with her hand still pressed against her mouth, staring at the rain streaking down the windshield, and for a moment the cruiser felt very small, like the walls were closing in around a memory she'd kept locked away for 8 years. It couldn't be. It couldn't be this simple. A man on a motorcycle, pulled over on a random stretch of Route 9 on a rainy Tuesday night, just happened to be the son of the very man who taught her husband to ride? The math of it didn't make sense. Coincidences like that didn't happen. Not in real life. Not to her. And yet here he was. "I'm sorry," Marcus said again, softer this time. He shifted in the seat. Careful, like he was worried any sudden movement might set her off. "Did I say something wrong? I didn't mean to upset you." Dana finally lowered her hand. Her fingers were trembling, and she didn't bother hiding it anymore. "No," she said, her voice thick. "No, you didn't say anything wrong. You said everything right. That's the problem." Marcus waited. He had a patience to him that surprised her, a stillness that didn't match the leather and the patches and the years riding with a club most people crossed the street to avoid. He just sat there, letting her find her words in her own time. "Tom was my husband," Dana finally said. The words came out cracked, like ice breaking on a pond. "Tom Riaz. He passed away 8 years ago. Heart attack. 52 years old, and he just..." She stopped, swallowed hard, tried again. He never talked much about Cedar Falls. Not the details, anyway. He'd get quiet whenever it came up, like there was something there he didn't know how to say out loud. But he talked about the shop. About Wrench Kane. "He told me your father saved his life, in a way. Gave him something to be good at, when nobody else believed in him." Marcus's jaw tightened, and Dana saw something pass behind his eyes. Something that looked like grief finding a mirror. "That Triumph," Dana went on, and now the tears came freely, sliding down her cheeks to join the rain still drying on her collar. "The one your dad talked about. The one they fixed up together that summer. It's still in my garage. Right now." Tonight, she let out a shaky breath. "I haven't touched it since he died. Couldn't bring myself to. It just sits there, covered in dust, half taken apart, exactly the way he left it the last time he worked on it. I didn't have the heart to fix it, and I didn't have the heart to sell it either. So it just stayed, broken for 8 years." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped low, rough with something that sounded almost like disbelief. That's Tommy's bike. That's Tommy's bike, Dana echoed, and a small, broken laugh escaped her, half sob and half wonder. Your father's handwriting is probably still on some old part in a box somewhere. I never threw any of it away. She looked down at the citation pad resting on her lap, the one she'd been filling out under the dome light before all of this started, before the flashlight caught the ring and the whole night turned sideways. Marcus Kane. Speeding, 34, in a 25 zone. It seemed like the smallest, most pointless thing in the world now. Dana tore the ticket in half, then in half again, and set the pieces on the dashboard between them. I'm not writing you up, she said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her wrist. I can't. Not after this. Marcus opened his mouth like he might argue, might say something about how she didn't owe him anything, but Dana didn't give him the chance. Would you? She hesitated, feeling suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't expected, like she was asking for something bigger than she had words for. Would you want to see the bike? Sometime? I don't know why, but I feel like you should see it. Marcus sat with that question hanging in the air for a moment, like he needed to turn it over in his hands before he could answer it. Yeah, he finally said. Yeah, I'd like that. Dana let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Relief washed through her, warm and unexpected. It had been a long time since she'd felt that particular kind of relief, the kind that comes from being understood without having to explain everything twice. Saturday, she said. If that works. I'm off shift. You could come by in the afternoon. Saturday works. Marcus reached into the pocket of his cut and pulled out a worn leather wallet, the kind that had been folded and unfolded so many times the seams had gone soft. He pulled out a small notepad, the kind you'd buy at a gas station counter, and a stub of a pencil. You want to write down your address, or you want to tell me and I'll remember it? I'll write it down, Dana said. She reached for the citation pad, flipped past the torn pieces of the ticket, and found a blank page underneath. Her handwriting came out shakier than she wanted it to, but she got the address down. 214 Larkspur Lane. She tore the page free and handed it to him. Marcus took it carefully, like it was something fragile, and tucked it into his wallet next to a photograph she caught just a glimpse of before he closed it. An old photograph, creased at the corners. She didn't ask. Here, he said, and he wrote something on his own notepad before tearing that page free, too. My number. In case something comes up. Or in case you change your mind. Dana took it. His handwriting was blocky and careful, the kind of penmanship a man learns when he's used his hands for work his whole life instead of typing. She folded the paper once and slid it into the pocket of her uniform jacket, right over her heart, though she told herself that was only because it was the closest pocket. I won't change my mind, she said. Marcus almost smiled then. It was small, barely there, but it softened his whole face, made him look less like a man the world had taught her to fear and more like someone's son. Someone's father, maybe. Just a man. All right then, he said. Saturday, he opened the cruiser door, and the cold night air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and pine trees. Before he climbed out, he paused, one boot already on the road. Officer Reyes, he said. Thank you. For tonight. For all of it. Thank you, Dana answered, and she meant it more than she could say. She watched him walk back to his motorcycle through the rearview mirror, watched him swing his leg over it with the ease of a man who'd been riding since before he could drive a car. Watched the taillight disappear down Route 9, until it was just a red dot swallowed by the dark and the rain. Dana sat there for a long moment after he was gone, her hands resting on the steering wheel, her heart still doing something strange and unfamiliar in her chest. Then she put the cruiser in gear and drove the rest of her shift home, the wipers ticking back and forth, her mind replaying every word Marcus had said. By the time she pulled into her own driveway, the rain had softened to a drizzle. She sat in the car a moment longer before going inside, and then, almost without deciding to, she pulled out her phone and called Ryan. He picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Mom? It's almost 11. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Dana said, though her voice cracked a little on the word fine. Something happened tonight. On my shift. I pulled someone over, and it turned out to be the strangest thing, Ryan. His father used to know your dad, back in Cedar Falls. He taught your dad how to fix motorcycles. It's the same bike, Ryan, the Triumph, in the garage. His father built it with your dad. There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough that Dana wondered if the call had dropped. "Who is this guy?" Ryan finally asked, and his voice had lost all its sleepiness now, replaced by something sharp and wary. "Mom, who did you pull over?" Ryan showed up at 9 the next morning, still wearing the wrinkled gray sweatshirt he'd probably slept in, his hair sticking up on one side. He didn't knock. He never did. He just let himself in the way he'd been doing since he was a teenager, calling out, "Mom?" as the screen door banged shut behind him. Donna was already at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee poured, because she'd known he'd come. Ryan was predictable that way, always had been, ever since he was a little boy who needed to check under his bed for monsters before he could sleep. "You didn't sleep," she said, sliding a mug toward him. "Neither did you, probably." He sat down across from her, wrapping both hands around the mug without drinking from it. His eyes were red at the edges. "Mom, I looked him up." Dana raised an eyebrow. "Looked who up?" "Marcus Kane." It didn't take long. The guy's got a patch on his jacket for a motorcycle club that isn't exactly known for Boy Scout activities. Ryan's voice had that clipped, careful tone he used when he was trying hard not to sound like he was lecturing her, and failing. "There's stuff online. Old arrests, nothing recent. But Mom, this isn't some guy from your church group." "I know what he is, Ryan." Dana kept her voice even. "I've been a cop for 15 years. I know how to read a record. Then you know this is a bad idea. I know his father built the bike your dad rode for 30 years. She said it slowly, like she needed him to really hear it. "I know he sat in my cruiser last night and answered every question I asked him, without flinching, without getting angry, even though I had every reason in the world to suspect him of something. I know what that told me about who he is." Ryan pushed a hand through his messy hair. "That's exactly what worries me. You're grieving. You've been grieving for 8 years, and you finally get some little thread that connects back to Dad, and you're ready to open up your whole life to a total stranger because of it. That's not clear thinking, Mom. That's need. That's you wanting something so bad you're not seeing straight." The words stung more than Dana wanted to admit, mostly because some small, quiet part of her worried he might be right. But she pushed the feeling down and met her son's eyes across the table. "I'm not blind, Ryan. I'm not stupid. I've spent my whole career learning how to spot a liar, how to read what's underneath what someone says, and I'm telling you, what I saw in that man's face last night was not a con. It was grief. It was a man carrying something heavy, same as me. You don't know that for sure. No, Dana admitted. I don't know it for sure. Nobody ever knows anybody for sure, not completely. But I've decided I'm willing to find out. Ryan set his mug down harder than he meant to, coffee sloshing over the rim. He's coming here. To this house, where you live alone. Yes, and if he's not who you think he is? If something happens? Dana reached across the table and put her hand over her son's, the way she used to when he was small and scared of thunderstorms. Ryan, I carried a badge and a gun for 15 years. I have handled men twice his size who wanted to hurt me, and I am still here. I am not some fragile old woman who needs you standing guard over her feelings. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. She said it gently but firmly, no room in it for argument. I appreciate that you worry about me. I do. It means you love me, and that means everything. But I am still your mother, and I am still capable of making my own choices, even the ones that scare you. Ryan looked down at the table, jaw working like he wanted to say more, but couldn't find the words yet. He's coming Saturday, Dana said. I already told him yes. And I'm not changing my mind, Ryan. Not about this. Ryan finally looked up at her, and though the worry hadn't left his eyes, something in his shoulders sagged, like he knew this was a fight he wasn't going to win. At least, not today. Fine, he said quietly. But I don't like it. Noted, Dana said, and reached for her coffee. Saturday came in soft and clear, the kind of morning that felt like the sky had been washed clean overnight. Dana stood at her kitchen window with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, watching the empty road at the end of her driveway. She had been up since 6, though she told herself she wasn't waiting. She was just an early riser. That was all. At 10 o'clock sharp, she heard it. The low rumble of a motorcycle engine, growing louder as it came down her street, then softening as it slowed and turned into her driveway. Dana's chest tightened. She set down her mug and went to the front door. Marcus was already swinging his leg off the bike when she stepped outside, pulling off his helmet and tucking it under one arm. He wore the same leather cut from the night of the traffic stop, patches worn soft at the edges from years of sun and rain. His gray beard was neatly trimmed, and up close, in daylight, he looked less like the shadowy figure she'd pulled over on Route 9 and more like a man who carried his years carefully, like they meant something to him. "Morning," he said, his voice quiet, almost careful, like he wasn't sure what kind of welcome he'd get. "Morning," Dana replied. She glanced past him at the motorcycle, gleaming black and chrome in the sunlight, then back at him. "You found the place all right?" "Wasn't hard. Small town." He shifted his weight, glancing toward the garage at the side of the house. "This the place?" "That's the place." Dana wiped her palms on her jeans, a nervous habit she thought she'd broken years ago. "Come on. It's not much to look at." She led him around the side of the house to the detached garage, its white paint peeling in long strips near the roofline. The side door stuck the way it always did, and Dana had to put her shoulder into it before it gave way with a groan. Dust hung in the air inside, catching the light that spilled through the small, grimy window near the workbench. And there it was. Tom's Triumph, sitting exactly where it had sat for 8 years, untouched beneath a heavy canvas tarp that Dana pulled back slowly, almost reverently, revealing the bike beneath. Marcus went still. The Triumph was covered in a fine layer of dust, its once glossy paint dulled with age and neglect, one tire flat and cracked. cobwebs strung between the handlebars and the front wheel. But even beneath all that neglect, the bones of the machine were beautiful. Sleek lines, a curved gas tank. The kind of bike that had been built with care, not just assembled on some factory line. "May I?" Marcus asked, nodding toward it. Dana nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Marcus stepped closer, crouching down beside the bike, running his fingers along the frame with the gentleness of a man greeting an old friend. His hand paused near the engine casing, and he leaned in, squinting at something Dana couldn't see. "There," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Right there." "What is it?" Marcus looked up at her, and his eyes were shining, wet in a way that made Dana's own throat go tight. "This weld. Right here, on the casing. My dad had this habit. This way he'd finish a weld with a little curl at the end, like a signature. Everybody at the shop used to tease him about it. Said he was an artist, not a mechanic." He touched the spot again, almost like he needed to make sure it was real. "This is his work. I'd know it anywhere." Dana crouched down beside him, close enough to see what he saw, though it just looked like an old weld to her. But it didn't matter what she saw. What mattered was the way Marcus looked at it, like he'd found a piece of his father he thought had been lost forever. "He touched this bike," Marcus said quietly. "My dad. His hands were right here." Dana's eyes stung. Tom talked about him sometimes, not a lot. But I remember him saying there was a man in Cedar Falls who taught him everything he knew about engines. He always said it like it mattered more than just fixing bikes. Marcus straightened up slowly, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand before looking at her. "Steady now. Let me help you fix her up." Properly, the way he would have wanted. Dana felt something crack open in her chest, equal parts grief and something warmer. Something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much." The following Saturday, Marcus showed up with a metal toolbox that looked older than his motorcycle. The handle was wrapped in electrical tape, and the sides were scratched and dented from years of use. He set it down on the garage floor with a heavy clunk and popped it open, revealing rows of wrenches and sockets organized with a precision that surprised Dana. "My dad's box," he explained, catching her look. "He gave it to me when I turned 18. Said a man's tools tell you everything about how he treats his work." Dana had cleared off the workbench the night before, wiping away years of dust, setting out clean rags and a coffee can for loose bolts. She'd even bought a new shop light, the old one having burned out sometime during Tom's last year, back when neither of them had the heart to replace it. "Where do we start?" she asked, pulling on an old flannel shirt of Tom's that she'd found in the hall closet. It still smelled faintly of him, like motor oil and cedar. Marcus studied the bike for a long moment, running his hand along the engine casing again. "We start slow. Engine's been sitting 8 years. Everything's seized up, probably. We take it apart piece by piece, clean everything, see what needs replacing." He glanced at her. "You ever work on an engine before?" "Tom tried to teach me once. I mostly just handed him tools and complained about the smell." Marcus almost smiled. "Well, today you're doing more than handing me tools." He showed her how to loosen the bolts on the engine casing, his big hands guiding hers the first few times until she found the right amount of pressure. He explained why you loosened bolts in a certain pattern, working in a star shape instead of straight around, so the pressure released evenly. He talked about torque like it was a kind of respect you paid to the metal, not too much force, not too little. "My dad used to say an engine's like a person, Marcus said, wiping grease from his fingers onto a rag. You force it. You break it. You listen to it. It'll tell you what it needs. Dana laughed for the first time in what felt like months, a real laugh that surprised her with how easy it came. Tom used to say something just like that. Except he said it about people, not engines. Sounds like they were cut from the same cloth. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, taking apart the carburetor, laying out each small part in the order they'd removed it. Exactly the way Marcus said his father had taught him. Dana's hands grew black with grease, her knuckles scraped from an angle she'd misjudged, but she didn't mind. There was something satisfying about the work, about seeing the pieces come apart, and knowing, someday soon, they'd go back together again. Running. By the time the sun started sinking low behind the trees, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, they had the engine mostly disassembled, parts soaking in cleaning solution, laid out across the workbench like the bones of something waiting to be born again. That's enough for today, Dana said, straightening up and pressing a hand to her lower back. I'm not as young as I used to be. None of us are, Marcus said, and there was something tired but content in his voice. Dana made a simple dinner, grilled chicken and corn on the cob, nothing fancy, and they ate out on the back porch as the light faded from the sky. Marcus told her about his father's shop back in the 70s, how Walter used to keep a jar of butterscotch candies on the counter for kids who came in with their fathers. Donna told him about Tom, how he used to whistle off-key while he worked, how he never could carry a tune but never stopped trying. They laughed about small things and grew quiet over others. The kind of comfortable quiet that only happens between people who understand loss without needing to explain it. The crickets started up in the yard, and somewhere down the road, a dog barked twice and went silent. Dana looked over at Marcus, his face lit gold by the porch light, and felt something she hadn't felt in 8 long years. It wasn't just comfort. It was warmth, real warmth, spreading slow through her chest like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long winter. Ryan Reyes sat in his apartment on Tuesday night, laptop glowing in the dark, a cold cup of coffee forgotten by his elbow. He'd told himself he was just being careful. That's what he did for a living, after all, digging through records at the insurance company, finding the details other people missed. It was only natural to turn that same skill toward the man who'd suddenly become a fixture in his mother's garage. He typed the name into the search bar. Marcus Kane. The first few results were nothing, just a Facebook profile with no recent posts, a LinkedIn page that hadn't been updated in years. But Ryan knew how to dig deeper than that. He pulled up the county records database, then a public court records site, then finally a background check service he'd used before for work. He entered $40 on his credit card and waited, his knee bouncing under the desk. When the report came back, his stomach tightened. Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Confirmed affiliation, going back over 20 years. Ryan's hands went still on the keyboard. He'd heard of the Hells Angels, of course. Everyone had. Bar fights, drug running. Guns, he didn't know all the details, but he knew enough headlines to feel his pulse quicken. He scrolled further. There were a few entries under Marcus's name. A disorderly conduct charge from 1998. A minor assault charge from 2003, later dropped. A citation for an unregistered firearm in 2009. Nothing recent, nothing that had led to real prison time. But to Ryan, sitting alone in the blue light of his laptop screen, the words on the page felt like sirens going off. This is the man spending every Saturday alone with my mother, he thought. In her garage. In her house. He didn't sleep much that night. By morning, his mind was made up. He grabbed his keys, didn't bother calling ahead, and drove straight to Dana's house, the same route he'd driven 100 times growing up, though it had never felt this urgent before. When he pulled into the driveway, he saw the garage door standing open, and his jaw tightened. There, kneeling next to the old Triumph, was Marcus, his broad shoulders hunched over the exposed engine, sleeves rolled up, grease staining his forearms. Dana stood beside him, holding a wrench out, laughing at something he'd said. Ryan parked his car harder than he meant to, gravel crunching under the tires, and got out fast. "Ryan," Dana said, straightening up, surprise crossing her face. "I didn't know you were coming by." "Yeah," Ryan said, his eyes fixed on Marcus. "I can see that." Marcus rose slowly to his feet, wiping his hands on a rag before extending one toward Ryan. "You must be Ryan. Your mom's told me a lot about you." Ryan looked at the offered hand for a long moment before shaking it, his grip firm, almost challenging. "Can't say she's told me much about you." The air in the garage shifted, tension crawling into the space where laughter had been just moments before. Dana glanced between the two men, her earlier ease draining from her face. "Ryan, is everything all right?" she asked carefully. "Fine," Ryan said, though his tone said otherwise. He kept his eyes on Marcus. "Just came by to see how the bike was coming along. Didn't realize you'd be here." "I'm here most Saturdays," Marcus said evenly, no defensiveness in his voice, just a plain statement of fact. "Your mom and I have been working on it together." "So I've heard." Ryan crossed his arms over his chest. "Hell's Angels, huh?" Dana's eyes widened. "Ryan," Marcus didn't flinch. "That's right." "Guess that explains the jacket," Ryan said, gesturing vaguely toward the leather cut hanging over a folding chair near the workbench. "Guess it does," Marcus replied, his voice calm, steady, giving nothing away. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with things unsaid. Dana looked at her son, then at Marcus, her hands twisting the rag she held. "Ryan," she said quietly, "why don't we talk inside for a minute?" Ryan didn't move at first, his gaze locked on Marcus like he was trying to see past the calm surface into something underneath. Finally, he nodded, once, short and stiff. "Sure," he said. "Let's talk." He turned and walked toward the house, not looking back, leaving a heavy quiet behind him in the garage, the kind that settled over both Dana and Marcus like a held breath neither one wanted to release. Inside the house, Ryan stood by the kitchen counter, arms still crossed, while Dana filled the kettle with water she didn't really need. Her hands were shaking. "Just a little. You did a background check on him," she said. It wasn't a question. "Somebody had to," Ryan said. "You weren't going to." "He's not dangerous, Ryan. You don't know that." "Not really. You've known him a few weeks." I looked at actual records. Dana turned to face her son, her jaw tight. "I know grief when I see it. I know loyalty when I see it. And I know when somebody's trying to hurt me, and this isn't that." Ryan didn't have an answer for that. Not right away. He looked past her, out the window, to where Marcus stood in the garage, giving them space, pretending to check a bolt he'd probably already checked twice. Something in his stillness, patient and undemanding, made Ryan's certainty waver. Just a little. He didn't say so. But he didn't push any further that day either. He left without apologizing. Dana didn't expect him to. Not yet. But the weeks that followed found a rhythm of their own, steady as a heartbeat. Every Saturday morning, right around 9, Marcus's motorcycle would rumble up the driveway, and Dana would already have coffee brewing, 2 mugs set out on the workbench next to the toolbox. They worked through the carburetor first, then the wiring, then the brakes. Marcus explaining each part patiently, the way his father must have explained things to him decades before. "Your dad taught you well," Dana said one afternoon, watching Marcus's hands move with the same sureness she remembered in Tom's. "He taught me everything," Marcus said. Wasn't much else he had to give, but he gave that. They talked as they worked, easy conversations that filled the garage like sunlight. Dana told him about Tom, the way he used to hum while he worked on the bike, off-key, and never embarrassed about it. Marcus laughed at that. A real laugh. The kind that softened his whole face. He told her about growing up in Cedar Falls, about the smell of engine oil that still made him think of home. Some Saturdays they barely spoke at all, just worked side by side in comfortable quiet, the clink of tools and the occasional radio station playing old rock songs filling the space between them. Dana found herself looking forward to those mornings all week, a feeling she hadn't let herself have in a long time. One gray afternoon in late October, rain tapping softly on the garage roof, Marcus sat back on his heels, wiping grease from his hands, and grew quiet in a different way. Dana noticed it, the shift in him, and set down her wrench. "You okay?" she asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He stared at the engine like it held something he was trying to figure out how to say. "I've got a daughter," he said finally. "Emily. She's 26 now." Dana waited. Not pushing, just letting the silence hold space for him to keep going. "Her mother and I split up when Emily was 12. Wasn't pretty. I wasn't around enough, and when I wasn't always the man I should have been." He shook his head slowly. "She doesn't talk to me much now. Birthday card once a year maybe. That's about it." "I'm sorry," Dana said softly. "It's my own doing," Marcus said. "Can't blame anybody else for that." He looked up at her then, his eyes tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "The club, the guys, they became my family after that. Only family I've really got now, if I'm honest. Guys who don't ask questions, don't judge you for what you've lost. Just show up." Dana felt something tighten in her chest. An ache of recognition. She thought of her own quiet house, the years since Tom died, the way she'd built a life out of routines and silence just to keep from feeling how alone she really was. "I know something about that," she said quietly. "The loneliness, I mean. Not the same as yours. But I know it." Marcus looked at her, something soft and understanding passing between them, 2 people who had lost different things but carried the same kind of weight. "Yeah," he said. "I figured you might." Ryan came by on a Tuesday evening, not a Saturday, which should have told Dana something right away. She was folding laundry on the couch when she heard his car in the driveway, the engine cutting off too fast, the door slamming a little too hard. He walked in without knocking, a thin folder tucked under his arm. His face had that look she remembered from when he was 16 and about to tell her something he'd been rehearsing the whole drive over. "We need to talk," he said. Dana set down the shirt she'd been folding. "Okay." He dropped the folder on the coffee table like it weighed more than paper should. "I did some digging. Real digging this time. not just a name search. Ryan, just look at it. His voice cracked, just slightly, the frustration underneath it obvious. Please, Mom, just look. She picked up the folder because she loved him, not because she thought it would change anything. Inside were printed pages, arrest records from decades back, mentions of brawls outside bars, a possession charge from 1998, disorderly conduct here and there. Old, faded by time. None of it violent, none of it recent, but Ryan had highlighted every line in yellow like it was a confession. This is who you're letting into our garage, Ryan said. Into your house. Into your life. This is from 30 years ago, Dana said, setting the folder down. People change, Ryan. I've arrested plenty of 19-year-olds who turned into good men. He's not 19. He's 45, and he's still riding around with a motorcycle gang. It's a club, not a gang, and you know that. Does it matter what we call it? Ryan's voice rose, filling the small living room. Dad would never have wanted this. A guy like that in his garage, working on his bike, getting close to you? Come on, Mom, think about what you're doing. Something in Dana went very still and very cold. Don't, she said quietly. Don't you dare tell me what your father would have wanted. I was married to him for 32 years. I buried him. I know exactly what he would have wanted, and it wasn't for me to sit alone in this house for the rest of my life, afraid of my own shadow. That's not what I'm saying. That's exactly what you're saying. She stood up, her hands trembling now, not from fear, but from something hotter. You looked at some old paperwork and decided you know this man better than I do. I sat across from him in the rain. I've watched him work on that bike for weeks, with more patience and care than most people show their own family. I've listened to him talk about his father, about his daughter, about things that break his heart just like things break mine. That's not nothing, Ryan. That counts for something. It counts for less than you think. If he's playing you, Ryan shot back. You're lonely, Mom. You've been lonely for 8 years, and now some guy shows up with a ring like Dad's, and suddenly you're letting your guard down for a total stranger. Doesn't that seem convenient to you? Doesn't that seem like exactly what somebody would do if they wanted something from you? The words landed harder than he probably meant them to. Dana felt her throat tighten, but she didn't back down. I have spent my whole career reading people, she said, her voice low and even now, more dangerous for how calm it was. It's the one thing I know how to do better than almost anybody. And I am telling you, as your mother and as a woman who has seen every kind of liar there is, that Marcus Kane is not lying to me. You don't know that, and you don't know him at all. They stood there, the space between them thick with years of grief neither of them had ever really talked through, all of it surfacing now, ugly and raw. Fine, Ryan said finally, his jaw tight, his eyes shining in a way he clearly didn't want her to see. Do whatever you want. You always do. He grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair and walked out, not slamming the door this time, which somehow felt worse. Donna stood alone in the living room, the folder still open on the coffee table, the silence around her heavier than it had been in years. The garage smelled like it always did on Saturday mornings now, motor oil and coffee and the faint metal tang of parts laid out on old towels. Dana stood at the workbench with a rag in her hand, not really cleaning anything, just holding it because her hands needed something to do. Marcus rolled his motorcycle up the driveway right at 9, same as always. He killed the engine, pulled off his helmet, and looked at her for a long moment before he even said hello. "You look tired," he said. "I'm fine." "Dana," he set the helmet down on the seat of his bike, gentle, like it was something breakable. "I've sat across from enough people in enough rooms to know when somebody's fine and when somebody's saying fine, because it's easier than the truth." She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Ryan came by Tuesday. Marcus didn't say anything. He just waited, the way he always did, like he had all the time in the world for whatever she needed to say. "He did a background check on you," Dana said. "Found some old arrests. Fighting, a possession charge, disorderly conduct." He printed it all out and put it on my coffee table like it was evidence in a trial. She watched his face for a reaction, some flicker of anger or shame, but all she saw was a kind of tired sadness, the look of a man who'd carried something heavy for a long time and set it down more than once, only to have somebody hand it back to him. "It's true," Marcus said. "All of it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's not." Dana leaned back against the workbench. "Tell me." He was quiet for a moment, looking down at the concrete floor like the words were written there somewhere. "I was 19, 20 years old. Angry about things I didn't even understand yet. My mom left when I was 12. My dad worked all the time trying to keep the shop running, and I found the club before I found anything else that made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Back then it wasn't what it is now. There were guys in it who liked trouble. I ran with them because I didn't know any better. The fighting? Bar fights, mostly stupid stuff. Somebody says something, somebody else doesn't like it, and next thing you know there's a table turned over and cops showing up." He shook his head slowly. "The possession charge was mine too. I'm not proud of it. I was carrying something I shouldn't have been carrying, doing something I shouldn't have been doing, and I got caught." "What changed?" Marcus looked up at her then, and something in his eyes had softened, gone somewhere far away. "My daughter was born. Sadie. I held her for the first time in that hospital room, and I remember thinking, if she ever looked at a police report with my name on it the way I was afraid she might someday, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. So I changed. Slow, at first. Stopped running with the guys who liked trouble. Started actually working in my dad's shop instead of just showing up when I felt like it. Took over for him when his hands got too shaky to hold a wrench steady. He rubbed the back of his neck, the leather of his cut creaking softly with the movement. I'm not saying I'm a saint, Dana. I've got regrets. I lost my daughter anyway, in a different way, through the divorce and my own stubbornness. But everything on that paper Ryan gave you, that was a kid who didn't know who he wanted to be yet. I know who I am now. It took me a long time to get here, but I know. Dana felt something loosen in her chest, some knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying since Tuesday night. She looked at him standing there in her garage, gray in his beard, calluses on his hands from decades of honest work, and she thought about every liar she'd ever pulled over in 15 years on the force. Every excuse that didn't sit right. Every story with a crack in it somewhere. There was no crack in this one. I trust you, she said. Completely. I want you to know that. Marcus's throat moved like he was swallowing something back. That means more than you know. Come on, Dana said, picking the rag back up, nodding toward the bike. We've got a carburetor to finish. They worked past dinner, past the point where the light through the garage windows turned orange, and then gray, and then disappeared altogether, the overhead bulb buzzing steady above them. Marcus talked her through the last of the reassembly, his hands guiding hers when she needed it, the two of them leaning close over the engine that was nearly whole again, closer than they had ever been. The morning came up clear and gold, the kind of Saturday that made the whole street smell like cut grass and fresh coffee. Donna was already in the garage when she heard the familiar rumble of Marcus's bike turning onto her street. Earlier than usual, the engine note eager somehow, like even the machine knew today was different. She stepped out onto the driveway, wiping her hands on her jeans, and watched him pull up. He killed the engine and swung his leg off, and that was when she saw it. He was holding something wrapped in a shop towel, cradling it against his chest like it mattered. "Got something for you," he said, and there was a look on his face she hadn't seen before. Something bright and boyish underneath all that gray in his beard. He unwrapped the towel right there in the driveway. Inside was a small chrome part, gleaming, brand new. "Final carburetor float," he said. "Been trying to track one down for 3 weeks. Original manufacturer stopped making them back in the 80s, but I found a guy outside of Portland who rebuilds old ones by hand. This came in the mail yesterday." Dana looked at the little piece of metal like it was made of gold. "That's it? That's the last part?" "That's the last part." Something electric passed between them, standing there in the morning sun. Dana felt her heart speed up, the same nervous flutter she used to get as a kid on Christmas morning, right before she was allowed to go downstairs and see what was under the tree. "Well," she said, her voice not quite steady, "what are we waiting for?" They went into the garage together, and Dana rolled up the door all the way so the light poured in, falling across the Triumph where it sat on its stand, more whole now than it had been in 8 years. The tank gleamed where Marcus had helped her repaint it, a deep forest green that matched the color Tom always said he wanted before he ran out of time to do it himself. The chrome parts shone from hours of polishing. All that remained was this one small piece, waiting to be seated into place. Marcus knelt down beside the engine, and Dana crouched next to him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. He talked her through it, same as he always did. Patient, unhurried, like there was no place either of them needed to be but exactly here. "Careful with the gasket," he said, guiding her hands with his own weathered fingers. "Don't want to tear it. There, now hold it steady." Dana held the float in place while Marcus threaded the screws, his hands sure and practiced even though she could see, if she looked closely, they were trembling just slightly, same as hers. Neither of them said much as they worked. The garage was quiet except for the small sounds of metal against metal, the occasional creak of Marcus shifting his weight, the hum of the radio playing low on the workbench, some old country song neither of them was really listening to. Hours passed like minutes. The morning light climbing higher through the open garage door slid slowly across the concrete floor, then began to lengthen and turn gold as the afternoon wore on. Dana lost track of time completely, caught up in the rhythm of it, the same rhythm she'd found every Saturday for months now, the rhythm that had pulled her back to life, one bolt at a time. By the time Marcus tightened the last screw and set his wrench down on the towel, the sun outside had dipped low, throwing long orange light through the open door and across the garage floor. "That's it," he said quietly. "That's everything." Dana stood up slowly, her knees stiff from crouching so long, and stepped back to look at the bike. It stood there whole. Complete, the chrome caught the evening light and threw it back in bright, clean lines. The green paint glowed deep and rich, every part of it, Every bolt and cable and gasket was exactly as it should be, exactly as Tom would have wanted it, restored by hands that loved him even though one pair had never met him at all. Marcus stood beside her, quiet, his eyes fixed on the motorcycle. Dana felt her throat tighten, her eyes stinging with tears she didn't try to stop. "We did it," she whispered. Marcus nodded, and when she looked over at him, she saw his own eyes were wet too, his jaw tight the way a man's gets when he's trying hard not to let something out. Neither of them said anything else. They just stood there together in the fading light, looking at what they had built. "Do you want to start her?" Marcus asked, his voice soft in the quiet garage. Dana's eyes stayed on the bike. 8 years. 8 years of walking past it in the garage, of not being able to look at it too long, of pretending she didn't notice the dust gathering on the tank. And now here it was, whole and gleaming, waiting for her. "I don't know if I can," she said. Marcus didn't push. He just stood there beside her, hands in his pockets, giving her all the time she needed. That was the thing about him. She'd come to learn. He never rushed anything. He let things happen in their own time, same as he'd let this whole friendship unfold, patient as the seasons. Dana took a breath and stepped closer to the bike. Her hand rested on the seat, worn leather that Tom used to sit on, and for a moment she could almost feel him there. Could almost hear his laugh carrying across their old backyard on some long-ago summer evening. "He'd want you to ride it," Marcus said quietly. "Not just look at it. Dad always said a bike that don't run is just a sad piece of metal taking up space. Said an engine wants to breathe." Dana let out a small laugh despite the tears already gathering in her eyes. "That sounds like something Tom would say too." "Guess some things get passed down," Marcus said. She threw her leg over the seat, slow and careful, like she was climbing onto something sacred. The leather creaked beneath her, worn into a shape that still somehow remembered Tom's weight all those years ago. Her hands found the grips, and she was surprised at how natural it felt, how her body seemed to remember even though her mind had tried so hard to forget. Marcus stepped in close, not crowding her, just near enough that she could feel his steady presence beside her like a hand on her back, even though he wasn't touching her at all. "Key's already in," he said gently. "Whenever you're ready." Dana looked down at the key, small and silver, sitting in the ignition like it had been waiting 8 years for this exact moment. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. She thought of Tom's hands on this same key, turning it 1,000 times over the years, taking this bike down back roads on Sunday mornings, coming home smelling like wind and gasoline, and always smiling. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to Marcus. "Okay," she turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened, just a small click, a pause that stretched out long enough to make her heart drop. "Give it a second," Marcus said quietly. "She's been asleep a long time." Dana tried again, and this time she felt it, the engine turning over beneath her. A low grinding cough like it was clearing its throat after years of silence. Marcus reached over without a word and adjusted something near the handlebars, small and quick, then nodded at her. "Try again." She did. The engine roared to life. It filled the whole garage, loud and alive, vibrating up through the seat and into her chest, into her bones, into every part of her that had gone quiet and still for 8 long years. The sound of it was exactly the way she remembered, exactly the way it used to sound on Saturday mornings when Tom would fire it up in the driveway before their rides. Donna burst into tears. They came all at once, everything she'd been holding back for years. Grief and joy tangled up together so tight she couldn't tell one from the other anymore. She sat there on the bike with the engine running beneath her, crying so hard her shoulders shook, and Marcus just stood beside her, one hand resting gently on her shoulder, letting her feel every bit of it without trying to fix it or rush her through it. "There she is," Marcus said softly, his own voice thick. "There she is." Dana laughed through her tears, a sound somewhere between sobbing and joy. "He's here," she said. "I can feel him. Right here." Marcus nodded, blinking hard, and let her sit there as long as she needed, the engine singing beneath her like something finally set free. After a while, when her tears had slowed and the engine idled steady and warm, Marcus stepped back and pulled his phone from his pocket. "I think we ought to celebrate this properly," he said. "Mind if I make a call?" Ryan showed up at 6:30, still in his work clothes, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Dana had asked him twice on the phone, and both times he'd said maybe, which she knew by now meant yes, but only because he loved her. He stood in the driveway for a second before coming in, looking at Marcus's motorcycle parked next to the Triumph like the two bikes were sizing each other up. Then he walked into the garage, hands in his jacket pockets, and gave Marcus a short nod. "Ryan," Marcus said, holding out his hand. "Good to finally meet you proper." Ryan shook it, quick and stiff. "Yeah, you too." Dana watched the whole thing from the kitchen doorway, her heart pounding a little harder than she wanted to admit. She'd set the table with the good plates, the ones she hadn't used since Tom's funeral, and there was a pot of chili on the stove that filled the house with a warm, homey smell. It felt strange to have people over again. Good strange. The kind of strange she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Dinner started quiet. Ryan kept his answers short, watching Marcus over his glass of water like he was waiting for him to slip up somehow, to show his true colors. But Marcus didn't rise to it. He just talked easy and slow, telling stories about his father's old shop in Cedar Falls, about learning to strip an engine down to nothing before he was even 10 years old, about how his dad used to say a man's word was worth more than any signature on paper. "Sounds like Dad," Ryan said before he could stop himself, then looked down at his bowl like he regretted saying it out loud. "Your mother told me a lot about him," Marcus said gently. "Sounds like he was a good man. The kind my dad would have liked." Ryan didn't say anything to that, but Dana saw something shift in his face, just a small crack in the wall he'd built up around this whole thing. As the evening went on, Marcus asked Ryan about his job, his life, listened careful to every answer like it actually mattered to him. He complimented Dana's cooking twice and helped clear the table without being asked, rinsing dishes in the sink like he'd done it in this kitchen 100 times before. Ryan watched all of it, quiet. But Dana could tell he was watching different now. Not looking for cracks anymore. Just looking. By the time they moved to the living room with coffee, something in the air had softened. Ryan even laughed once, a real laugh, when Marcus told a story about dropping an entire toolbox on his own foot during his first week working with his dad. Dana felt something warm settle over her chest, watching her son and this rough, gentle man share a laugh together like old friends. "You know," Ryan said, setting his mug down, "I did some digging on you. After that first day Mom told me about you." Marcus nodded slowly, not surprised. Figured you might. Found some stuff, Ryan admitted. Nothing too bad. Old stuff, mostly. He glanced at his mother, then back at Marcus. I still don't totally get why you were on that road that night. Just seems like a strange coincidence is all. The room went quiet. Dana looked at Marcus, waiting for him to shrug it off the way he usually did, easy and calm. But something changed in his face instead. His jaw tightened, and he set his coffee cup down slow, like he was buying himself a second to think. It wasn't a coincidence, Marcus said finally, his voice low. Dana felt her stomach drop. What do you mean? Marcus looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked unsure of himself, almost afraid. I've been looking for you, Dana, for months. My dad, he's real sick. Doesn't have much time left. And before he goes, all he wants is to find Tommy's widow. Said it was a promise he made a long time ago, one he never got to keep. The words hung there in the warm, quiet living room, heavy as stone. You were looking for me, Dana said slowly, like she was trying to make the words make sense. That whole night. Pulling you over, that wasn't chance at all. Marcus swallowed hard. No, ma'am. It wasn't. Ryan's eyes went sharp again, flicking between his mother and Marcus, the warmth from moments before draining right out of the room. Dana sat very still, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like it was the only solid thing left in the room. The warmth from a moment ago had drained out of her too, leaving something cold and hollow in its place. How long? She asked quietly. Marcus looked at her, his eyes full of something that looked like regret. What? How long have you been looking for me? Before that night on Route 9. He didn't answer right away, and that silence told her everything she needed to know. It had been a while, longer than she wanted to imagine. Few months, Marcus finally said. I found some old records from Cedar Falls. Names, addresses, it took time to narrow it down. My dad, he didn't remember much clear anymore. Some days good, some days not. But he kept saying the name Tommy, kept saying he had to find his widow before he ran out of time. Dana felt her chest tighten. She thought about that rainy night, the flashlight catching the ring on his finger, her own breath catching in her throat. She had thought it was fate, some strange, beautiful accident that brought them together. But it hadn't been an accident at all. It had been a plan, and she was just the last piece of it, waiting to be found and collected like a puzzle piece he'd been hunting for months. You pulled over, she said slowly, and let me think it was chance. You let me invite you into my home. Into my garage. You watched me pour my heart into that bike, and you never said a word. Dana. His voice cracked slightly on her name. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? Ryan cut in, his voice sharp now, all the softness from earlier gone. Sounds exactly like that to me. Ryan. Dana held up a hand, though she wasn't sure if she was defending Marcus or just trying to keep the room from spinning out of control. Her mind was racing, replaying every weekend they'd spent in the garage together. Every laugh, every story he'd shared about his father. Had any of it been real? Or had he just been playing a part, waiting for the right moment to spring this on her? She thought of Tom's ring, the one on his finger, the one identical to her husband's. She thought about how her hands had shook the first time she saw it. That part had been real, hadn't it? The ring wasn't something he could have faked. But her head hurt trying to sort out what was true and what wasn't, and right now, All she could feel was the sting of having been searched for like some kind of assignment, some box to check off before his father passed. "I should have told you sooner," Marcus said, leaning forward, his hands clasped together like he was praying for the right words to come. "I know that. Once I got to know you, once we started on the bike, it didn't feel like the right time anymore. I didn't want you to think that's all this was." "But it is what this was," Dana said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Isn't it? Somewhere in there." Marcus didn't answer. He just looked at her, his broad shoulders slumped, his gray beard catching the lamp light, looking older and more tired than she'd ever seen him. Donna stood up slowly. Her legs felt unsteady beneath her, like the floor had tilted somehow. "I think you should go, Marcus." His face fell. But he didn't argue. "Dana, please, just let me explain. I need time," she said, cutting him off gently but firmly. "I need to think. About all of this. About what's real and what isn't." Marcus nodded slowly, standing up from the couch. He didn't look at Ryan, didn't look at anything except Dana's face, like he was trying to memorize it before he left. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, I understand." He walked to the door without another word, pulling his jacket off the hook by the entryway. Dana followed him out onto the porch, the night air cool and damp against her skin. She watched him swing his leg over his motorcycle, watched him sit there for a moment without starting the engine, like he was hoping she might change her mind. She didn't. Marcus started the bike, the engine roaring to life in the quiet night, and rode away down the driveway, his taillight fading into the darkness until it disappeared completely. The days after the dinner blurred together for Dana. She woke up when the sun came through the blinds and went to bed when the house got too dark to sit in without turning on a lamp. In between, she did small things. Washed a dish. Folded a towel. Sat down. Stood up. None of it felt like it mattered. She kept finding herself standing in the doorway of the garage, looking at the Triumph. It sat there gleaming under the single bulb hanging from the ceiling, chrome polished, tires black and full, the leather seat stitched back together where it had cracked years ago. Every piece of it had a memory stuck to it now. The carburetor Marcus had shown her how to clean, his big hands guiding her smaller ones. The bolts they'd replaced on a Saturday afternoon while rain tapped against the garage roof. The first time she'd heard the engine turn over after 8 years of silence, and how she had cried without even meaning to. It was the most alive she'd felt since Tom died. And now it just sat there, quiet and finished, like a wound that had healed wrong. She would stand there for 10 minutes, sometimes 20, just looking at it, not touching it, not starting it, just looking. Like the bike itself might tell her what to think. Was the whole thing built on a lie? Had Marcus been kind to her because he wanted to be, or because his father sent him on some kind of mission and she was just a stop along the way? She didn't have an answer. So she'd turn off the light and go back inside and sit in the quiet house that used to feel peaceful and now just felt empty. On the 4th day, Ryan showed up without calling first. She heard his car in the driveway and felt a flicker of something, not quite relief but close to it. At least it was someone. He knocked twice before letting himself in, the way he always did, and found her in the kitchen with a cup of tea gone cold in front of her. "Mom." He pulled a chair out and sat across from her. "You look terrible." "No offense." "Thanks," she said flatly. You haven't answered my calls. I know. Ryan studied her for a long moment. He had that look on his face, the one he used to get as a kid when he was trying to figure out how to say something without making it worse. I talked to Marcus, he finally said. Dana's eyes lifted. You did? He called me. Not you, me. Saeed he didn't want to push. But he was worried. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. Mom, I looked into everything I could find on that guy when this all started. I wanted to catch him doing something wrong. I wanted proof he was using you. He paused. But watching him with you these past weeks, watching him work on that bike like it actually mattered to him, watching the way he talked about his dad, that wasn't an act. Nobody fakes that. Dana looked at him, surprised. Weeks ago, it had been Ryan sitting in this same kitchen, telling her she was being naive, that she didn't know what she was doing, letting a stranger into her garage and her grief. Now here he was, defending the very man he'd tried to run background checks on. He should have told me sooner, she said quietly. Maybe, Ryan admitted. But Mom, think about it. He found out his dad was dying. He found some old records, and the one thing his father wanted before he passed was for someone to make sure you were okay. That's not nothing. That's not some con. Dana looked down at her cold tea, turning the cup slowly between her palms. I just need some space, Ryan. I need time to think about it on my own terms, not because you're pushing me one way or Marcus is pulling me another. Ryan sat back, quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. I hear you. But as he watched his mother's tired eyes, the way her shoulders curled inward like she was trying to disappear into herself, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe his suspicion weeks ago had planted something in her that was still growing. Something that was keeping her locked up in this house, alone, staring at a motorcycle that used to make her smile. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Dana lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her the way old houses do, little creaks and pops like the walls were shifting in their sleep. She turned onto her side, then her back, then her side again. The clock on the nightstand read 1:47, then 2:15, then 2:40, each red number mocking her a little more than the last. Finally, she gave up. She pulled on her robe and padded down the hallway, past Ryan's old bedroom door, past the bathroom, to the hall closet she hadn't opened in years. It stuck a little when she pulled on it, swollen from humidity, and she had to tug twice before it gave way with a groan. Inside was the usual mess of forgotten things. Winter coats nobody wore anymore. A broken umbrella she kept meaning to throw away. Boxes of Christmas decorations stacked crooked against the wall. And on the top shelf, pushed back where she'd put it 8 years ago and never touched since, sat a plain cardboard shoebox, the top corner soft and caved in from age. She knew what it was before she even took it down. Tom's things. The letters and photographs from Cedar Falls, from before she knew him, from the years he almost never talked about but kept anyway, tucked away like a secret he wasn't ready to share. She carried the box to the kitchen table and sat down under the hanging light. The house quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Her hands hovered over the lid for a moment. Then she lifted it off and set it aside. Dust rose up, catching in the light. The smell hit her first, that particular smell of old paper, faint and dry, like the inside of a book left in an attic. She reached in and pulled out a stack of envelopes tied together with a rubber band that had gone brittle and snapped the moment she touched it. Letters from Tom's mother, from a cousin in Ohio, from someone named Pete, who Dana had never heard of. She set them aside gently, like they might crumble if she wasn't careful. Underneath the letters were photographs, dozens of them, curled at the edges and yellowed with age. She picked through them slowly. Tom as a boy, squinting into the sun on a bicycle too big for him. Tom as a teenager, lanky and grinning, standing next to a car that looked like it had seen better decades. Tom at what must have been a high school dance, his hair slicked back, looking uncomfortable in a suit that didn't quite fit. She smiled at each one, the tightness in her chest easing just slightly, like touching something familiar in the dark. Then she found it. The photo was small, square, with a white border gone soft and gray with age. It showed two young men standing outside a garage, the kind with a hand-painted sign she couldn't quite read anymore. Faded letters that might have said Kane's Repair once upon a time. One of the boys was unmistakably Tom, younger than Dana had ever known him, maybe 19 or 20, his hair dark and full, his smile wide and easy. His arm was slung over the shoulder of another young man, shorter, broader, with a grease rag hanging out of his back pocket and a grin just as wide as Tom's. Dana's breath caught. She didn't need anyone to tell her who it was. She could see it in the shape of the jaw, the set of the shoulders, the same steady eyes she'd looked into weeks ago in her own driveway during a rainstorm. It was Walter. Young and strong and laughing, his arm draped over Tom's shoulder like they'd known each other their whole lives, like nothing in the world could come between them. She turned the photo over with shaking fingers. On the back, in pencil gone faint with time, someone had written, Tommy and Wrench, summer of '71. Dana sat very still, the photograph trembling slightly in her hand, the kitchen light humming overhead, the rest of the shoebox forgotten on the table beside her. Dana set the photograph down on the table, gently, like it might break. Her fingers stayed on the edge of it for a long moment. She looked at Tom's young face, so full of life, so far away from the man she'd spent 30 years loving, and yet so clearly him. The same crooked smile, the same easy way of standing, like the world wasn't something to worry about. She reached for the letters again, this time reading them slower, really reading them, instead of just skimming for names. The first one was dated 1972, written in Tom's looping handwriting, addressed to his mother back when he was still young and away from home for the first time. Ma, you'd like it here. Wrench says I've got good hands for engines. Says I could be a real mechanic someday if I stick with it. He's a good teacher, patient even when I mess up the timing on the carburetor for the third time. His old man ran the shop before him, and I think he wants to make him proud. I get that. Anyway, don't worry about me. Wrench looks out for me like I'm his own brother. Dana's eyes stung. She kept reading. Another letter, a few months later. Wrench and I rode out to the lake today, broke down halfway there, of course, and we had to walk the bike the last 2 miles laughing the whole way. He said something today that stuck with me. Said, family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's just who shows up when you need them. I think about that a lot out here. She set the letter down and pressed her hand to her mouth. Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's just who shows up when you need them. That was Tom. That was exactly Tom, the man she married, the man who never once turned away someone who needed help, who believed in people even when they gave him every reason not to. And that was Walter too. She could see it now, so clearly it almost hurt. The gentleness in Marcus, the patience, the quiet way he'd never pushed her, never demanded anything, just showed up week after week and let the friendship grow at its own pace. That wasn't manipulation, that was inheritance. That was a father's lesson passed down through a son who barely knew he was carrying it. Dana thought about the way Marcus had looked at her when he admitted the truth about Route 9, the way his voice had cracked just slightly, the way his hands had gone still in his lap like he was bracing for her to throw him out. She had done exactly that. She had looked at a man risking his own pride to fulfill his father's dying wish, and she had called it deception. Shame settled heavy in her chest, but underneath it was something else. Clarity. She gathered the letters and the photograph carefully back into the shoebox. Her movements steady now instead of shaking. The kitchen clock read almost 4 a.m, but she didn't feel tired anymore. She felt awake in a way she hadn't in years. She picked up her phone from the counter and scrolled to Marcus's number, the one he'd given her weeks ago scrawled on the back of a receipt, because his hands had been covered in grease and he didn't want to smudge her phone screen. She had saved it without really thinking about why. Her thumb hovered over the call button. It was too early. It was too late. It didn't matter. She pressed it. He picked up on the third ring, his voice rough with sleep or something heavier. Donna? Marcus, I'm sorry. The words came out in a rush, no preamble, no easing into it. I found some letters tonight. From Tom. And a photograph of him and your father, from back when they were young. I read what your father meant to him, what he wrote about him, and I understood something I should have understood already. You weren't using me. You were doing exactly what your father raised you to do, what Tom would have done for someone else's family. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice had gone thin, stretched tight like a wire about to snap. He's in hospice, Dana. The words came out cracked, barely holding together. My dad. He's got days left, maybe less. He's been asking about Tommy for months. Every single day, and I couldn't find you in time to bring you to him while he's still... He stopped, and Dana heard him take a shaking breath. While he could still know you were real. Ryan was already awake when Dana came downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee and his car keys sitting between them like he'd made a decision before she'd even asked. I heard you on the phone, he said. Through the wall. I wasn't trying to listen. Dana wrapped her robe tighter around herself. Ryan, it's 4 a.m. I know what time it is. He pushed one of the mugs toward her. Get dressed. I'm driving you to Cedar Falls. She blinked at him. You don't have to do that. Mom, his voice was steady in a way she hadn't heard in weeks. I've been a jerk about this whole thing. I did a background check on a man who was trying to fulfill his dying father's last wish, and I treated him like a criminal for it. I'm not letting you drive 4 hours by yourself after the night you just had. Get dressed. She didn't argue. There wasn't time, and there wasn't any fight left in her anyway. She went upstairs, pulled on jeans and a sweater, grabbed the shoebox of letters without really thinking about why, and came back down to find Ryan already warming up the car in the driveway. The sun wasn't up yet when they pulled onto the highway. The world outside the windshield was still gray and half asleep, farmhouses and fields sliding by in the dark. Dana held the shoebox in her lap like it was something precious. Maybe it was. Tell me about him, Ryan said, after almost an hour of silence. Dad. when he was young. Before I knew him as just Dad. So she told him. She told him about the letters, about Wrench and the broken-down motorcycle, and the 2-mile walk back laughing. She told him what Tom had written about family not being blood, about showing up when someone needed you. Ryan listened without interrupting, his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. "That sounds like him," Ryan said quietly. "That sounds exactly like him." "It does." Dana looked out the window at the fields turning gold as the sun finally broke over the horizon. "I think I forgot that for a while. Not who he was, just how much bigger his life was than the 8 years I spent grieving him. He had a whole world before me. People who loved him before I ever did." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "I was scared," he admitted, "when Marcus started coming around. I kept thinking about all the ways someone could take advantage of you. I didn't stop to think that maybe I was the one being unfair, judging a man by his jacket instead of what he actually did." "You were trying to protect me," Dana said. "I can't be angry at you for that. I could have protected you without treating him like garbage." Ryan's jaw tightened. I looked at his record and saw exactly what I wanted to see. I didn't look at the last 10 years. I didn't look at the man who spent every Saturday in our garage teaching you how to gap spark plugs because he thought it would make you happy again. Dana reached over and put her hand on his arm. "You came around, Ryan. That's what matters. Your father would be proud of that. Admitting you're wrong is harder than being right in the first place." They drove another 2 hours through small towns and long stretches of nothing, stopping once for gas and bad coffee from a station that hadn't changed its sign since the 90s. Donna found herself telling Ryan more about the anchor ring, about the Triumph, about the strange, twisting feeling of finding pieces of his father she'd never known existed. Ryan asked questions, real questions, the kind that meant he was actually listening, actually trying to understand. By the time the sign for Cedar Falls appeared, the sun was already low and orange, throwing long shadows across the road. Dana felt something tighten in her chest, equal parts fear and hope. The hospice was a low brick building on the edge of town, surrounded by pine trees just starting to darken as evening settled in. Ryan pulled into the parking lot and cut the engine. Marcus was already outside, standing near the entrance like he'd been waiting there for hours. When he saw the car, he started walking toward them, and Dana could see it even from a distance, the relief breaking across his face like sunrise, his eyes bright with something that looked almost like gratitude too big to hold. He reached the car just as Dana stepped out, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. "You came," he said finally, his voice thick. "Take us to him," Dana said. Marcus nodded and turned toward the doors, leading them inside. The room was small and dim, lit by one lamp in the corner and the last orange light coming through the blinds. It smelled like clean sheets and medicine, that particular hospital smell that never quite left a place no matter how many flowers sat on the windowsill. There were flowers there now, a bunch of yellow daisies starting to wilt in a plastic cup, and a stack of get well cards nobody had the heart to say weren't going to help. Walter Kane lay propped up against 3 pillows, so thin that the blanket over him barely showed the shape of a body underneath. His skin had gone the color of old paper, and his hands, folded on top of the blanket, looked more like bird bones than the hands of a man who'd once rebuilt engines for a living. But his eyes were open. His eyes were sharp and clear, fixed on the doorway like he'd been watching it for hours, waiting for exactly this moment. Dana stepped inside first. Marcus stayed by the door with Ryan, giving her space, though his eyes never left his father's face. Walter looked at her for a long moment. Really looked. The way people look when they are trying to memorize something. Then, his mouth started to tremble. "You have his eyes," he whispered. Dana's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected questions, maybe caution, maybe confusion. She hadn't expected a dying man to look at her and see her husband so clearly it broke his voice in half. "Tommy always did have kind eyes," Walter said. "Softest eyes on any man I ever knew, and hardest worker too. Never made sense to me how the two things fit together in one person, but they did in him." "You knew him," Dana said, and it wasn't really a question. Her own voice was shaking now too. She moved closer to the bed, pulling a chair over without being asked, sitting down so she was level with him instead of standing over him like some kind of visitor with somewhere else to be. "Knew him," Walter repeated, and then the tears came, sliding down the creases of his face, more of them than seemed possible from a man so small and worn down. "Best friend I ever had. Better friend than I deserved, if I'm being honest with you, which I intend to be, because I don't have the time left to be anything else." Ryan shifted in the doorway. Dana reached back without looking and found his hand, squeezed it once, then let it go so she could give both of hers to Walter, who was reaching for her now, his grip surprisingly strong for someone who looked like a stiff wind could carry him away. "We made a promise," Walter said. 19 years old, both of us, sitting on the tailgate of my truck outside the shop. We'd just buried my uncle, who raised me after my folks passed, and Tommy sat with me the whole night so I wouldn't be alone. And somewhere in there, we made a pact. Foolish thing, probably, the kind of thing young men say when they think they're going to live forever. Whoever went first, the other one would look after his family. No matter what. No matter how much time passed. He stopped, catching his breath, and Marcus moved forward like he might help, but Walter waved him off with a shake of his head, determined to finish. I moved away not long after. Lost his address somewhere in 3 different moves. Told myself I'd track him down eventually, that there was always more time. And then, years went by. And then, decades went by. And I never did. I let my best friend down, Mrs. Reyes. I let him down for 40 years. And it has sat on my chest every single night since, like a stone I couldn't put down. His voice broke completely then, and he pressed her hands to his face like he was trying to hold on to something solid. When I found out Tommy passed, and I never got the chance to keep my word, I thought I'd die with that promise broken. I sent my boy out looking for you because I couldn't do it myself anymore. This was the last thing I needed to do right in this world. Finding you. Finally, finding you. The next 2 days moved slow and fast at the same time, the way important days always do. Dana came back the next morning with coffee for everyone and a photo album she dug out of her closet the night before, the one with the cracked spine and the pictures curling up at the edges. She sat by Walter's bed and opened it on her lap, turning pages slow so he could see. "That's him at 25, she said, pointing to a photo of Tom leaning against a truck, squinting into the sun, grease on his hands. Fixing the neighbor's mower. He never could say no when somebody needed help. Walter's eyes lit up looking at it. Look at that grin. He had that same fool grin the day we rebuilt my first carburetor. Took us 6 hours and it still didn't run right, and he laughed about it the whole drive home. He kept a toolbox in his trunk his whole life, Dana said, just in case somebody needed help on the side of the road. "That's my fault," Walter said, and for a moment his voice was almost strong again, almost young. "I taught him that. Never leave a man stranded if you got the tools to help him." Marcus sat in the corner chair most of that day, quiet, listening. Every so often he'd add something. A story his father had told him growing up about a friend named Tommy. Stories Marcus never knew were about a real person until a few weeks ago. Ryan sat too, closer to the bed than he'd been the first day, and somewhere in the afternoon he started asking questions of his own. What was Cedar Falls like back then? What was the shop like? Did Walter really teach his dad to ride a motorcycle before he could legally drive a car? Walter laughed at that one, a real laugh, thin but true. Snuck him out on that Triumph when we were 17. His mother would have skinned us both. By the second day, Walter was growing tired faster. He slept more, woke less, and when he did wake his voice had gone soft as paper. But his eyes still found each of them when they were in the room, still held on to their faces like he was drinking them in. "Tell me about the bike," he said to Dana that afternoon, his words slower now, more spaced out. "Marcus said you brought it back. Tommy's Triumph." "We did," Dana said. "Marcus taught me everything you taught Tom. Every torque spec, every little trick with the carburetor. It runs now. It runs beautiful." Walter smiled, eyes wet. Good. That bike deserved to run again. Tommy loved that bike more than he loved most people, God rest him. That night, none of them left. Ryan brought blankets from the car, and they took turns in the two chairs by the bed, Marcus sitting closest, his father's hand resting inside his own big rough one. Dana sat on the other side, and Ryan stood behind her chair with his hand on her shoulder, the three of them keeping a kind of quiet watch that needed no words to explain itself. Somewhere around 2 a.m, Walter's breathing changed. It grew slower, softer, each breath spaced further from the last, like a tide pulling gently back out to sea. Marcus leaned in close and whispered something to him, too low for the others to hear. Something maybe just meant for the two of them. Walter's eyes opened one more time. He looked at Marcus, then at Dana, then at Ryan, and something in his face settled, like a man setting down a heavy bag he'd carried a long, long way. "Kept my word," he whispered, so quiet it was almost just breath. "Finally kept it." "You did, Dad," Marcus said, his voice thick and wet. "You did good." Dana took Walter's other hand, and Ryan reached down and rested his hand over both of theirs, all three of them connected through him, through this dying man who had spent 40 years carrying a promise like a stone and had finally set it down. Walter's chest rose one more time, slow and even. Then, it didn't rise again. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after. But it wasn't the kind of quiet that comes from grief. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something has finally, completely, come to rest. Outside the window, the first gray light of morning was just beginning to touch the sky. The VFW hall in Cedar Falls smelled like old wood and fresh coffee, the way it probably had for 50 years. Folding chairs lined up in rows, but most people stood, packed in close, spilling out toward the open double doors where the afternoon sun poured through in a wide gold stripe across the floor. Dana smoothed down the front of her jacket and looked at the covered shape in the corner of the room. Draped in a white sheet, a red ribbon tied around it like a present nobody had opened yet. Her heart was going fast. She hadn't expected that. She'd thought after everything, after Walter, after the long drive home from the hospice with Ryan's hand steady on the wheel, that this part would feel easy. It didn't. It felt like the biggest part of all. Marcus stood beside her in a clean button shirt instead of his cut, though his leather vest hung over his arm, patches and all. He looked nervous, too, which surprised her. A man his size, with a beard like gray wire and arms like tree trunks, standing there twisting his hands like a kid at his own birthday party. "You okay?" she asked him. "Just thinking about my dad," he said. "Wishing he could see this." "He can," Ryan said, stepping up on Marcus's other side. He'd worn a tie, which Dana hadn't seen him do since his father's funeral. "Trust me. Somebody like Walter, he's not missing this." The mayor of Cedar Falls said a few words nobody really listened to, and then an old man named Frank Dobbins, who used to run the hardware store back when Tom and Walter were young, told a story about the two of them racing motorcycles down Main Street at 2 in the morning back in 1974, getting chased off by a sheriff who couldn't catch either one of them. The crowd laughed, warm and easy, the kind of laughter that comes when a story feels like it belongs to everybody in the room. Then, it was time. Dana stepped forward with Marcus on one side and Ryan on the other, and together they pulled the sheet away. The Triumph gleamed under the hall's old lights, chrome polished bright. The tank painted deep forest green, just like it had been the day Tom bought it second-hand as a young man. A small brass plaque sat mounted on a wood stand beneath the front wheel, in memory of Tom Reyes and Walter Wrench Kane. Friendship that outlasted time. Loyalty that never broke. The room went quiet, then broke into applause, soft and full. The kind that comes from people who understood exactly what they were looking at. Dana felt her eyes fill up, and she didn't fight it this time. She let herself cry, right there in front of everybody, because for the first time in 8 years, it didn't feel like sadness. It felt like something finished. Something whole. Afterward, people mingled, ate potato salad off paper plates, told more stories. Donna watched Ryan talking easy with some of Marcus's club brothers who'd ridden up for the ceremony, laughing at something one of them said, and she thought about how far they'd all come from that rainy night on Route 9. When the crowd thinned and the sun outside had dropped low and orange over the tree line, Marcus walked her out to his motorcycle parked at the edge of the lot. "Ride home?" he asked, holding out the spare helmet. Dana looked back at Ryan, who was leaning against his car, watching them with his arms crossed and a small smile on his face. "Go ahead, Mom," he said. "I'll follow behind you." She took the helmet, pulled it on, and climbed onto the back of the bike behind Marcus, wrapping her arms around him the way she used to wrap them around Tom all those years ago. The engine roared to life beneath her, strong and steady, and they pulled out onto the road, the golden light spilling gold across the fields on either side. As the wind rushed past her and Cedar Falls shrank small behind them, Dana thought about how strange life could be. How the people who looked the most different from us, the ones we judged fastest and feared without reason, were sometimes the very ones sent to remind us who we really were underneath it all. Leather jackets and badges, she thought. Same beating heart underneath. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.